guest today is Nigel Van Wieck, an English painter who moved to New York in his early 30s. He still lives there now, and you can see his love of the States in his work, which often features New York City scenes and other American culture. One of the first paintings of yours that I saw was that picture of a woman sat on the Q train in New York. And I think the reason I saw it was because it did go viral a couple of years ago, to the extent that there are photos of people who've seen your painting and then gone onto the Q train and taken pictures, sat in the same sort of position, tried to recreate that painting in a photo. And I wanted you to tell me a little bit about what it's like to see something, when you do so many works, what it's like to see one of them suddenly get so much more attention than some in the past have, and how you feel about people making their own versions of it in that way.
It was extraordinary. I mean, it was something that I did not expect. But and the thing about that image was that it lay dormant for a long time. It was a picture that originally was not on a subway. The girl was in a bar with another girl and a guy in a white suit. And I didn't like the composition. And the original was a pastel, oil pastel. So I scraped everything off of the paper except for the girl. And she just sat on the paper for 3 months, pinned on my wall in the studio. And then one day I walked in and I said, a subway. So I drew a subway in, and that was the picture. I gave it to my dealer in New York, and he had it for a year, and he said he couldn't sell it. So he gave it back to me. I then gave it to my dealer in Palm Beach, who put it in the window of his gallery, and he could not sell it. And then a year later, a woman walked in and said, I was in Palm Beach to bury my mother, and there was this image of a girl on a subway train in the window, and it's haunted me. Do you still have it? And she bought the original. And then when social media started, I put it up on Tumblr, and a Japanese blogger picked up on it, and that's when it went viral. And so it's a picture that was a surprise to me, because I had tried to sell it through 2 dealers and had not been able to. And now everybody wants that picture. And so it's extraordinary. And also, just the way it's affected people. I get wonderful emails and letters from girls that identify with it. And it's extraordinary to me. I then, because of the success of the Japanese blogger, I then had to do, so many people were asking me for prints of the picture, and I only had a really bad 35mm slide. So I did a painting of the picture, which then my gallery in New York sold. And from that, I did a silk screen, a limited edition silk screen, which has also done incredibly well. And there are many, many posters of it. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Does that painting still hold an important space in your heart, or is that something that you're sort of sick of the sight of, for want of a better phrase?
No, I will always have a soft spot for that painting, because it's sort of established me on the internet in a way, and it's given me a recognition worldwide because of that painting. I mean, it's been used in book covers. It's been used. It's influenced television shows. It's influenced movies. I see people giving talks with the picture behind it. Just yesterday, there was a medical journal that came out, and they were using the image for their page. So I still love it.
You mentioned there that it's been that painting has been repurposed and used for things like book covers. Um, and I find it interesting how, as recently as 50 years ago, a painting would be in a gallery or on someone's wall at home. But other than that, it wouldn't have many other purposes. But now, like, I had one of your paintings as my desktop background on my computer for a little while. And is that something that you're bothered by? Something that it can be used in a much more casual sense than being thought about when looked at in a gallery. I could just stick it on my phone or whatever. And it's, how does that make you feel as an artist? Does it feel like you're having your work taken as seriously as it should be?
Well, it makes me feel really, really good, because I think the more people that are into my images, the better, the happier I feel. When it comes to whether it's diminishing art, I don't think it is diminishing art. I think that images should be used any way that they can be used.
And how about the way people react to your images? Because I read a little piece someone else had written about you online, and they said that your themes include gender and voyeurism and a couple of other things. And I sort of read that and I thought, is that right? Is that something that you're putting in there? I've read that you talk about isolation being a key theme in your work, but those things I mentioned just then, I'm not sure are that visible there. Do you think, what is it like to have your work put into words like that by a reviewer?
Well, I think all artists are voyeurs in some way. I mean, you're looking and then you're making a creation from what you've seen, my work is very much observational. I mean, I'm painting a scene where you're watching, and I paint the scene so it's open-ended. I don't like crossing T's and dotting I's, so that I want you to be able to interpret the ending. I heard an interview once with Merce Cunningham, and the interviewer said, "I just saw your dance, and then when we came out of the theater, I listened to what people were saying, and I got 4 different explanations for the dance. Which one was the real explanation?" And he said all of them. And I think that's how I see my work. I paint it, and the way that you interpret it is up to you.
You've said in other interviews that isolation is a really important theme for you in your work, which I see as being quite a personal experience, the way that you think about that. And I wanted to know why it is that you don't feature yourself in your work. You don't do self-portraits or feature your own person in the paintings. Is there a reason for that?
Well, because I'm the one that's doing the painting, but when I look at a lot of the images, like the first lifeguard picture that I did, which was the Miami lifeguard picture, my dealer looked at it and said, "Oh, it's you." So I think that occasionally you end up painting yourself in the picture, but I don't consciously do that. I just paint what I want to paint.
I interviewed a musician on the most recent episode of my podcast, and I had found that to my ear, they sounded very much like another artist that I liked, like almost as if that was an obsession they had. And when I said to this musician, I said, "Is that something that you're consciously doing? I can really hear the influence of that artist in your work." And she said that she hadn't actually heard of that artist, and it was just purely coincidental. And that made me want to ask other people, other artists and makers, what's it like having someone else's influence pegged to your work? Is it a compliment to have something like that? Or is it something that you feel you're being put in a box? How do you respond to comparisons like that?
I think those comparisons are inevitable. They're going to happen. And I don't mind them if they're intelligent. But some of them are just so ridiculous. I just have to bite my tongue. I'll give you an example. I think that the greatest pose in Western art is Ingres' Odalisque. And Ingres is a 19th century Orientalist French painter. And I I had a model come into the studio, and I thought, oh, I'll put her in the Ingres pose. So I put her in the Ingres pose, and I did a painting, and she was really good. She owned the pose. And when I did the painting, I thought, oh, I'll put her in a swimming pool and I'll put tiles around it, making references to Oriental 19th century painting. When I posted it, people were saying it's just like a hopper. That's a stupid remark, because it's nothing like a hopper. So that kind of thing drives me crazy. When people make intelligent comparisons, like to Hopper, I don't mind. I take it as a compliment. I mean, to be compared to Hopper is a great compliment. I mean, he's a great painter.
What do you think makes people say things like that? Are they just seeing something in your painting that isn't there, or is it like a need to find a reference to something they've seen before in it?
I suspect that a lot of people are making the references because somebody else has made the reference. But when I went back to painting, because I was a kinetic sculptor working in light, my obsession has always been painting light. And Hopper's obsession is painting light. One of his quotes is, all I want to do is to paint sunlight on a wall. So it's very easy for people to make a comparison, because not only, I mean, we both lived in New York, we both painted in New York, we both paint light, and he has his solitude and I have my solitude. But that part of it is very different, because his is sort of miserable and dour, and mine is contentment. But I think that's why people make the comparisons with Hopper.
Earlier in your career, when you first went to art school, you started as a painter, but you mentioned there, by the time you finished, you were doing neon and kinetic works. It really, your experience in art school changed the medium you were using. And that happened in the 60s, which is a period that in nearly every medium is really romanticized as this like really free, open and transformative spell in our history. And I thought it might be interesting, as you literally went through art school in that spell, do you look back and see that as romantically as other mediums might? Is that something where you think the 60s was like a huge key part of my life, or is it just you think media has painted it in that way?
The 60s were the best. I mean, just to live in that decade was extraordinary. And I was extremely lucky because I lived on the King's Road in the 60s. The reason that I ended up becoming a kinetic sculptor was because I was at art school when the Student Revolution was on, and all the faculty that I went to study under were fired. And the only people that were interesting were a group that had been thrown out of the Royal College, and they ended up at Hornsey, where I was. And they were working in neon, and I was a young kid, and they were the only ones that had energy, so I was attracted to it. In retrospect, I'm really glad I had that period, because besides what you're talking about, sort of the freedom in art, it taught me about light, and I understand light, and that's the glue to my work today.
So there are traces of things that you learned when you were studying still in your work nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, the way that light falls on things, and the thing about how light changes when colored light hits another color and things like that. It's second nature to me when I paint.
Your paintings, for the most part, feature like visibly American imagery. Do you find that that's something that you'll never want to stray from? And I wanted really to know, as you grew up in England, Do you think you could find the same magic and the same engagement from doing paintings of like English scenes in a similar way?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously, one paints wherever one is and paints what's in front of them. But the key thing for me was that I left college as a kinetic artist, and I was a kinetic artist for 10 years. And when I decided to go back to painting, it was in 1978, I think. And I moved to New York in 79. And it was the perfect time to move because I had just gone back to painting. I didn't really know what I wanted to paint. And I came to New York and I saw American realism and realized that's what I wanted to paint. So I've always been in love with the images of America, and that's what I really like painting. I mean, my wife's Peruvian, and when we go to Peru, I paint in Peru, and I like those pictures, but the bulk of my work will always be American. I consider myself an American realist.
Do you think that if you never made the move to New York, that you'd have stuck with painting at all, or is it just something that was incidental?
I would have been a painter, but I have no idea what I would have been painting. One of the things that is important to me, and I'm told by other people, is that I have a wonderful color sense. And the thing about the English is that they tend to go to the browns and the grays. There aren't many really colorful English painters. So I don't know what I would have done if I had stayed there. Somebody once explained to me that it was all to do with camouflage. You know, if you live in the tropics, then you put on bright colors because bright colors are around you. And in England, which is sort of grey and green, it's all tweeds and browns.
I'm reading a book at the moment about the London painters from just after the war, people like Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud. And I'm reading the chapter I'm on at the moment is about Bacon, and about how he said something I thought was quite interesting about he really wished that he was part of like a scene isn't right. He said he wished he was part of a movement where he could meet up with like-minded artists, but he felt like he was out there on his own. Do you think you're part of something bigger than your own work, or do you feel like you're doing your own thing? How does your career work in that way?
I sort of turned my back on the art world a long time ago and just decided that I was going to paint what I wanted to paint. So I'm very sympathetic to what Bacon is saying. I'm a traditional painter, but I paint very much my time, but it's not what other people are painting. Just going to Bacon and Freud, there's an interest there because I think Freud is an extraordinary painter, but he was a terrible colorist. And what elevates Bacon is, I think, his color. He's one of the few English painters that really did use color.
I see in your work a lot of a cinematic quality, very atmospheric, and the way things are framed sort of remind me of a lot of films. And I was wondering if that's like a conscious thing. Do you watch a film and find that you want to recreate the atmosphere of that in your work? How do other mediums impact your paintings?
Not really. I mean, occasionally I'll be watching a movie and think, oh, that's an interesting idea. I'll play around with that in a composition. But I don't seek inspiration elsewhere. I mean, I've always thought inspiration is for amateurs, and it's basically what I do is I go into the studio in the morning and I paint whatever I feel like painting, and when I don't feel like painting that, when the energy is no longer on that canvas, then I put it down and I'll start something else. So I usually have like, I don't know, somewhere between 5 or 10 paintings propped up against the wall, and I'm working on all of them at the same time. I've never been a strong supporter of messages. I mean, obviously, all art has meaning, but I have found that if I try to think about that and concentrate on that, it becomes clunky and awkward. And so I just let what I have to say just happen. And I'm really involved just in formal problems like composition, light, and the kind of paint that I want to use. When I was at art school, I was a lot younger and a lot more sort of, I suppose, ambitious about being successful in the art world, and as everybody is, everybody dreams of being the David Hockney or whatever. None of that applies to me today. I'm just interested in painting what I want to paint, and I don't particularly care what other people think. But then I did, and I think, we all did. At that age, but we were very political. I mean, I was in the student union, and we were demonstrating. We thought we had a voice. But one of the things that was really interesting to me about that period was that in England, the student revolution was basically about educational reform, as opposed to a political message which was going on in France or the war in the United States. And we demanded at that time that we had representation on the governor's board, on all the committees and everything, and all those things were worked out and put into place. And this was in the 60s. In the 70s, I went back and taught at Hornsey for 2 years. And the great revelation for me was that all the students then had no interest on being on the governor's board or the committees or whatever. All they wanted was studio time. And suddenly occurred to me that all these people that had lost their education or their jobs for a principle that the next generation had no interest in whatsoever. It taught me a lesson.
It's quite cynical, isn't it? I mean, the fact that you said you thought you had a voice rather than you made sure that you did have a voice, that says quite a lot in itself, doesn't it?
Yes.
You don't feel that people that you were involved with made much of a difference then?
Not really, no. It didn't. It's the organization survived, and all the gains that had been fought for, the next generation had no interest in. So they withered and they disappeared.
Do you think there's art out there that's happening at the moment, especially in big cities like New York, that does make a difference and has got the power to change the way things work politically, or is it all just people in their youth being naive about how powerful these things are?
I think art is in a really interesting place because it really has gone worldwide. I mean, it's transglobal now. And I think the internet is, in a way, the new dealer. There's a wonderful book by Ross Hunter called Judgment of Paris. And it's about Paris in 1875 and the beginning of French Impressionism. And he says that, French Impressionism was a reaction against the Academy, which was the status quo. And he argues, and I think it's a good point, that one of the reasons that French Impressionism was successful was because at the same time it was the birth of the dealer. And the dealer was the one that championed the new art and gave it to the new collectors. And from my eye, the art dealer is now the status quo. It's the establishment. And I always wondered if art was going to change, what would change it? And I think that the internet and social media is the new dealer. And it's, as with Q-Train, I think it's making a big difference.
Having worked as an artist under both of those systems, do you have one that you prefer?
Well, I'm a traditional painter, so I appreciate a lot of the ideas of traditional dealers and the way they show and collect art. What I liked about that time is that it was about connoisseurship. Today, art has become a commodity and it's about money. And it's whether a picture is or a work of art is good or bad is not determined on the aesthetics of the piece. It's determined on how much it will sell at auction. And I noticed that's true in movies. When I was a kid, movies were judged by good reviews. Today they're judged by box office. So we've gone into this sort of monetary system, which I sort of do not like. And I think that a way of freeing that is the internet, is social media, because they're more interested in what it's saying rather than what it's worth.
Nigel, what would you like to offer up as your Who's Flying the Plane hidden gem?
I have two, and one is well known and the other is sort of not known. My first would be Winslow, who I think is an extraordinary American painter and is the equivalent of Titian, Velázquez, whatever. I mean, I just think he's an extraordinary painter. The other one is a painter called Archibald Motley, who was practically unknown. And when I did dance pictures about 20 years ago, I did a whole series on dance. And I discovered Motley then, and he was a black artist that, I think he was the first black artist that was accepted by the Institute of Art in Chicago. And I'm guessing it was the 20s, I'm not sure. But his pictures were absolutely wonderful, and nobody knew about him. And I found a book on him, and I was just mesmerized by his work. And then about 4 years ago, the Whitney did a show of his work, and it was the first time I was able to see them for real. And they really are wonderful pictures. And I was wandering through the Met the other day downstairs in the basement where the contemporary American paintings are, and lo and behold, they had a Motley on the wall. So he's now beginning to be recognized, but he is a wonderful black painter from the middle part of the century.
Thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to me today, Nigel.
Okay. It was great talking to you, Alex.